The story begins with the fact that one stormy active day a boy named Tony found himself all alone in a big windy desert. He looked very strange, as Tony was just silent and writing or reading something in his little notebook. At one point he was seen and surprised by two zombie hell villains. They were completely surprised to meet a little boy in the vast desert. They thought for a long time whether the boy was human or an unearthly creature, and how he came to be near them in the first place. The evil zombie villains thought it over at first, and then got very excited, because the living flesh itself came to them, and they thought it was a real good luck. So the boy continued to stare intently and silently into his little notebook. Without thinking twice, the villains of zombie hell approached the boy and asked him why he was alone in this scary place. They also asked if the boy knew that the place was very dangerous. The zombies were pleased, for they were very happy that the living flesh itself had come to them. They thought that the boy had come for his friend whom they had caught the same day. They laughed and rejoiced. They were surprised at the boy's courage, but it only made them laugh. The zombies of hell were very pleased with the day's catch. They had caught two living things in one day, and they were happy about it. They also thought that their boss would be just as happy about the news. The boy Tony remained silent. He just calmly and carefully lifted his head to assess the zombie hell. And then the boy was gaining superpowers in his hands. Not far from this place was a huge tall building, which was exactly the lair of the zombie demons. There were many of them, having fun and mocking their victims. The main boss was already in his lair with the same guy who had been caught by the zombies in the morning. The guy's mouth was taped shut, but even so it was obvious that he was very scared to be around the zombies of hell. A whole group of hell zombies were training their strength in this place. They were very angry and strong. At one moment they heard footsteps, and everyone was in utmost shock. They looked carefully in the direction of the strange sounds, and from what they saw in shock was even the very boy who had been caught by these terrible zombies. In front of them stood silent that same kid Tony, no fear on his face. He was as calm and cold-blooded as possible. The villains of hell were very surprised to see Tony in their lair. They couldn't even figure out how this guy got past the guards below. Tony's bravery made the zombies very surprised. Everyone just stood there and watched the guy carefully. Even the main zombie boss of hell was surprised to see Tony in their lair. At one point Tony spoke. The boy showed the drawing and asked if his buddy named Serioza was in the area. The zombie boss was very angry and didn't like the fact that this boy was so brave. A crowd of angry zombies of hell looked at the boy and waited attentively for what would happen next. The boy repeated his question and added that he was told that Serioza must be in that place. The guy who was caught was just in shock. He had hoped that he came to save him, but his name was not Serioza. He just did not understand what Tony was talking about. Boss Zombie Hell asked Tony, "Is this kid we caught this morning a friend of yours?" The guy confidently answered no and added that he had never seen this guy before, and then looked intently and silently at the zombie boss. At this point, in an angry and rude voice, the zombie hell boss asked the guy, "Then why did you destroy my guards from below?" Tony replied without any emotion that the guards just annoyed him. The zombie boss of hell was very angry. He decided to destroy the guy. He called his helper and ordered him to put Tony to sleep. The fearsome, wild zombie servant understood his task and agreed to fulfill his goal. He said that he would take out Tony and leave only little pieces of him. Also, this scary zombie destroyer had a huge sword with which he attacked the guy. The wild servant was striking very hard and viciously at Tony. The boy who had been caught in the morning was as frightened as he could be by what he saw. The zombie servant attacked Tony with strong destructive blows with his sword. He was already satisfied with his work, as there was almost nothing left of Tony, and the servant reported to his boss that he had accomplished his task. After a moment, the boy's body began to regain its strength and shell. His arms and body in general were fully restored in a few minutes, and he looked as good as new. After that, he uttered the phrase that they would not be able to destroy him that way. The wild zombie servant was surprised by this turn of events, because he had already decided that he had closed the matter with Tony, but it turned out not so simple. At that moment, the boy jumped up and started attacking the wild servant of the zombie hell. He was striking with no violence and strong blows, as well as the boy threatened not to mess with him. His superpower was unbelievable. The boss of the zombie hell, as well as the kid who was caught in the morning, stood with their mouths open at Tony's amazing actions. They were in utmost shock. The zombie boss couldn't believe his eyes. He had never seen anything like this before. This made him very angry and furious. The boss gave orders to all his men to attack Tony and destroy him forever. He thought that the guy would use some trick to trick the zombies, and the second time it would not work for sure. He shouted at the guy that how dare he show up at all in their lair and destroy his fighters. The boss was very furious. A crowd of evil wild zombies of hell began to attack the guy, but Tony kept his total calm. With one action, the guy caused the destructive dice, which damaged the zombies. Speed, dexterity, and superpowers were all available to Tony. He skillfully and technically destroyed the evil zombies one by one. Instead of weapons, he used the bones he had recently summoned himself. After a while, the scary zombies tried to run away from the guy, but he left them without a chance. Little Tony easily and quickly copes with each villain, destroying them. It looks like just a little boy, but in fact the owner of superpowers. The evil wild zombies were quite numerous, so it took a long time for the guy to destroy each one. He destroyed all of them one by one, then he tore out a part of himself and used it as a weapon. Everyone around was just shocked at the courage and strength of little guy Tony. The evil wild zombies had hopes that the guy would get tired and they could destroy him, but the guy's energy and strength were not going to disappear at all. With powerful lightning strikes, Tony destroyed his opponents. The kid kept destroying the zombies, and then he stopped and said, "This is so annoying, I'm sick of you already." The evil zombies never lost hope of destroying the guy. He demonstrated his superpowers, but even that didn't stop the zombies from hell. They kept attacking the guy with all their might. But Tony continued to be cold-blooded and destroyed everyone quickly and easily. After a while, there were only a few people left in the building: the boss, Tony, and the kid who had been captured by the zombies that morning. The boss and the kid were very scared because there was no one left. At one point, the zombie boss yelled, "What are you doing, asshole? Who are you anyway?" After these words, Tony's boyfriend was already standing right in front of the zombie boss and looking him in the eye. The zombie boss was surprised that so quickly the guy was right in front of him. Tony asked him one thing: if he was this seriosa. The zombie boss was silent for a while, thinking carefully, looking at the guy, and then asked him, "Why are you looking for seriosa?" Guy Tony replied that he had been told that only the zombie seriosa could destroy him with his power, and that the others could not. "You fearless boy, who do you think you're laughing at now? If you want to die so badly, I'll destroy you right now, angry zombie boss." Tony gathered his strength and looked intently at the boss. All he uttered before he struck, "If you're not seriosa, then." In an instant, the zombie boss's entire body was wrapped in strong magical veins that wrapped around the zombie's body. Each stream of magical strong veins Tony strained from his hands, and after a while the boss was all tangled up. Tony had already been warned for interfering with him. Strong magical veins were surrendering the boss's body, and at one point he just exploded like a balloon. The guy who had been kidnapped by zombie demons in the morning was just in shock. He looked around and saw only fear and horror. He mooed as he realized that he was all alone. All this guy could think about was how Tony could wipe out all the evil zombies all by himself, and so fast. Tony was getting closer and closer to the guy and already felt his fear. The kid was watching very carefully, waiting for what would happen next. It even crossed his mind that Tony might destroy him as well as everyone else, but he tried to reassure himself that this was not the case. Tony pulled the tape off the frightened guy's mouth with a sharp movement of his hand, apologized, and asked him an important question. He showed his drawing on a little notebook and asked the guy if he knew where this guy Serioza was. The boy was trying to calm down a little bit by recounting the last events of the day. He looked into the guy's eyes and then answered that the guy he had just destroyed was Serioza. Tony was upset when he heard this information. His expression changed, and all he could think about was that he had failed again. As Tony got ready to leave, the guy shouted after him, "Wait a second." Tony turned around and asked what was the matter. The frightened guy had changed his mind at first, but then he thanked Tony for saving him from the zombies from hell. Smiling, Tony left the building and the guy, and after a while he was gone. All that was left was the kid sitting there, terrified and shocked. Outside, Tony took his little notebook out of his pocket and then crossed out the drawing. Many years ago, a long time ago, the world was completely destroyed by a zombie virus. There were few people left who managed to survive, but most of them turned into evil zombies. Over time, their species evolved and they turned into monsters such as zombies from hell, which are a mixture of zombies and humans. This is called a zombie outbreak from hell. Civilization has fallen. But Tony was lucky because he managed to survive as a human. After that fateful day, Tony gained his immortality. Meanwhile, the guy who survived the zombie thought that if Tony was going to save him, he should have at least untied his hands. At one point, the guy heard some noise that sounded like footsteps, turned around frightened and saw his friends on the doorstep who were looking for their partners. Two guys I knew approached this prisoner, who was nicknamed Captain, and started helping him by untying his hands. They asked what happened and how the guy was tied up. The captain, remembering that terrible day, reported that there was a little boy who had wiped out all the zombies. His friends were surprised. They questioned several times whether the little boy had really destroyed them all. But the captain insisted. He said he knew it sounded crazy, but it was true. He said that the boy had suddenly appeared out of nowhere and wiped them all out one by one. The captain's friends asked him if he knew where the boy had gone, to which he replied that he hadn't had time to ask him. The captain was very embarrassed, but he explained that he was just scared and could not say anything. His friends were surprised. They asked if the boy was a zombie, to which the captain confidently replied that it was a man. At one point, one of his friends noticed footprints. After carefully examining the fresh footprints, the friends asked the captain if the boy was wearing sneakers, to which they answered in the affirmative. The boys thought about the situation with surprise. After a while, Tony was in the cemetery at his mother's grave. He was sad and wondering what to do next. At that very moment, the captain and his friends were also in the cemetery. They were very surprised because the guy looked just like a schoolboy. They could not believe that he was the one who had destroyed all the zombies. One of the friends looked intently at the guy and then looked at the captain. This guy was obviously up to something. Meanwhile, Tony sat there unsuspecting and flying in his thoughts. Abruptly and quickly, one of the guys ran out with his gun and started swinging it at Tony. He wanted to destroy the guy quickly and easily. He kept stabbing with his axe, the guys yelling at him to stop, that it was all a mistake. But the guy pointed the weapon right at Tony's throat, leaving him without an important organ like his head. At this point, Tony put his head back in place, much to the surprise of his opponent. The guy smiled and was amazed, for Tony really was immortal. Tony was silent, and then he said, "Please stop bothering me and go away." The guy, when he heard the phrase disturbing as if he had lost his mind, he started attacking Tony again. He tried to use weapons and his strength as much as possible. Every round that went off the guy, Tony used his strength to stop. He let out his long veins which caught the bullets. This really surprised the guy, for he had never seen anything like it in his life. Tony didn't understand at all what this guy wanted, but the guy was clearly surprised by Tony's abilities. He explained to the guy that he could have just destroyed him, but he didn't. The guy took it as a compliment. He seemed to be treating him with derision. Tony said he didn't know why the guy was acting like that and asked him to leave because he didn't like to destroy people. At one point, the guy snaps and strikes at Tony again, provoking him. Later, the guy took out a knife and put it under Tony's neck and asked the question, "How long does it take you to regenerate?" Tony decided to ask again and apologized, and then heard that the wounds on his neck were fresh, which is why he got the question in his direction. The guy pointed at the scar with his knife and said that the wound still hadn't healed. Tony didn't understand what the guy meant at first, but then he became aware of the situation and realized that his wound was still on his neck, and it had never healed before. After that, In one deft move, the guy let his hair down and it turned out to be a very beautiful, attractive girl. She apologized for being late and it turned out that her name was Kate, the forest captain of the death squad. The girl also offered Tony to become part of the death squad, as the guy has a priceless talent for immortality. The girl's friends were surprised by this turn of events and were very surprised looking at Tony and Kate. Kate decided to let him know that of course she wasn't telling him to just join their society and that they would make it up to Tony. She said she'd heard that Tony wanted to be destroyed and that she could make that wish come true. Tony was very interested in this question. The girl told him that in their squad are very capable scientists and they know how to do it. The guy really wanted to know the information and asked the girl how to do it, but the girl said that she does not know because they have to ask the scientist. Kate pointed her blade at the boy and informed him that this knife was made by their scientists. Tony hesitated and looked carefully at the blade of the knife. The girl remarked that she was sure this was the first time something like this had happened to him, and her offer was very tempting. Tony continued to fly through his mind and think about the situation. The guy asked if the girl was sure it could be done at all. Kate smiled and then asked what the guy's name was. Tony looked the girl in the eye and thought about the Satatsuatsia, then told her his name. The girl said not to worry Tony and built her magic blade into him. Kate said that Tony would now destroy the zombies from hell with them. Together they will regain their lost lands, and they will make sure that the day will come when human society will be restored, and then she will destroy him as he asked. The girl stood in front of the guy while he flew pensively in his thoughts. She looked at him and smiled. At one point the guy said that his fire had long since gone out, but she was giving him a chance to pull off a self-destruction. Tony was glad that now he really could one day go to sleep forever.